Sarah, will you start?
Yeah. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Sarah Stone from the Universal Newborn Hearing Screening Program at the Department of Public Health. Thank you for attending. I'd also like to thank our partners in today's webinar, the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Today's webinar is being presented in spoken English with ASL interpretation. Captioning is being provided by a live captioner. To access captioning, please go to the bottom of your screen and hit the CC icon to turn on captions. The ASL interpreter will be spotlighted in addition to the presenter. All participants have been muted and cameras are off. If you have a question, please enter it into the question and answer box. This webinar will be recorded. There will be a brief survey at the end, and we would ask that you take a few minutes to complete it. I am now going to turn it over to Tricia Ford.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Tricia Ford. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Program and Policy here at the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We've had a long-standing agreement with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to collaborate on improving the skill set of both teachers of the deaf and our educational interpreters. Our DESE steering committee includes parents, educators, teachers, and interpreters from all over the state, both private and public entities. This group is committed to fostering understanding for special educators and to continue to improve the educational opportunities of our deaf and hard of hearing children. In addition, some of you may know that the Commission has 4 children's specialists who are available statewide to consult on any educational concerns for both parents and educators. We actually work with infants right on through to age 21. Our children's specialists are highly knowledgeable in the areas of special education, deaf education, IEPs, 766 and 504 planning. You may contact Bonnie Lincoln at the Commission for referral if interested, and information will be sent out at a later date. I would now like to turn this over to my partner, Lauren Viviani. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lauren Viviani. I am the Assistant Director of Special Education at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And I am so grateful today for Sarah, for Tricia, for Renee, and for Samrin to coming together to talk about, to participate in this webinar, and especially for Barbara for taking on, she was an important author in the Purple Book, as we call it, the Educational Service Guidelines, and I'm just incredibly grateful for this opportunity. And one of the reasons that the department is so interested is one of our jobs is to promote best practices for students with disabilities across the Commonwealth. And we do that in a couple of ways. One way are webinars like this, providing technical assistance across the Commonwealth. Another way is, as Tricia mentioned, we partner with other state agencies to ensure that our services are coordinated. And then third, we provide professional development by providing contracts for experts across the Commonwealth. So for instance, we have contracts with Boston University who are working on ASL and total communication personnel prep and in-service. We work with other early childhood and ASL curriculum literacy specialists to ensure that all kids, ASL and kids who use oral methods are, that we're promoting best practices and research-based curriculum. So with that, I will turn it over to Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to this amazingly collaborative team of professionals and parents that work together in our Commonwealth to make sure that students who are deaf and hard of hearing receive the best possible services and optimize outcomes. As you've heard, I was one of the authors of these guidelines called Optimizing Outcomes for Students Who are Deaf and Hard of Hearing, that is published by the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. This is actually the third edition. Editions come out about once a decade. And so today I will be really introducing you to this resource, these guidelines. And I'm particularly excited about talking about them because, again, Massachusetts, the Department of Education, MCDHH, Newborn Hearing Screening, the Department of Public Health have all agreed that we as a state will be looking at these guidelines and ensuring that that Massachusetts students get all of the services and supports that they need, and we will be using these guidelines as our guide. I wanted to just give a couple of disclosures. I don't receive any funds for participating in the writing of the book. This particular book came about actually because of a very interesting collaboration between schools for deaf and hard of hearing students who use spoken language and CEASD, which is the Conference of Educational Administrators of Schools and Programs for the Deaf. And about 5 years ago, we started something called the Common Ground Project, where we were looking at what we could do as professionals that supersedes any discussions about appropriate communication opportunities for children or other areas that are a little bit contentious in our field. And what we were doing was basically coming together to see if we could get some support from the US Department of Education to update the guidelines that had been, at that time, almost 10 years old. And we were eventually successful. And so that Common Ground project was part of the impetus for updating the guidelines. I also serve on the board of the Council on Education of the Deaf, and as was mentioned, was a member of the writing team for these guidelines. Before talking about the guidelines, I just want to be sure to highlight the resources that we have in Massachusetts, the specialized resources that we have for anyone who really wants information about deaf education. As you've heard, the Massachusetts Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing has 4 children's specialists who work throughout the state, working with families and with school districts and other providers to ensure that families and professionals have the resources and information they need. In our state, we have a number of specialty service providers for early intervention, and these are people who are experts in working with children who have various degrees of hearing loss. And we represent quite a range of specialty areas within the field of deafness. There are also numerous private programs. I'm the director of the Clark School campus in the Boston area, but there are many private programs throughout our state. Massachusetts doesn't have a state school for the deaf. Instead, we have a network of private and public programs that serve deaf and hard of hearing children and students. We also have a number of really outstanding hospital-based deaf and hard of hearing centers and audiology centers. And we have membership and advocacy organizations in our state that can also serve as wonderful resources. At the end, I think we will give you a link to the MCDHH website that actually lists all of these specialized providers. But I just wanted to highlight for you the amazing resources that we have. Deafness is a low incidence disability, and any degree of hearing loss in a newborn or young child is a very low incidence disability, affecting 2 to 3 newborns per 1,000. So this is a specialized area, and as a result, many people don't really have expertise or background specifically in this field. So in Massachusetts, we have numerous resources, and we're happy to share those with anyone who would like. So a little bit about the background and the history of the publication of these guidelines. As I said, these are published by the Association of State Directors of Special Education, and the first edition came out in 1994. You can see about 12 years later, the next edition came out. And then in 2019, 2020, the current third edition came out. The previous one we used to refer to as the Blue Book because it had a blue cover. This one has a purple cover, and we're starting to call it in our state the Purple Book. This slide actually gives you the link to actually be able to download free of charge these guidelines. You can contact NASD, the NASD organization, if you'd like a bound version of the guidelines, but it's also possible to download them free of charge. So today we only have a short time to talk about optimizing outcomes. And so what I'm going to do is take you through the basic chapters in this guidebook to give you a sense of the topics that are covered, and then kind of let you delve in more detail into those areas where you would like more information. We're hoping actually that this is perhaps the first in a series, and at the end of this presentation, you'll have an opportunity to let us know what topics you're particularly interested in, and if any of these specific topics that are addressed in the guidelines are of special interest to you. We're very interested in delving in further. So the first chapter really goes over what we're calling essential principles for services for deaf and hard of hearing students. And I'm not going to read all of them here to you, but really, I think the most important thing to focus on is that we have extremely high expectations for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. We really do expect that with the right early intervention and the right supports, that students who are deaf or hard of hearing can perform at the level or above the level of their peers. And that is true of students who have hearing loss of varying degrees. And it's also true of students or children who have additional challenges, and challenges in addition to hearing loss. Critical to all of this is a focus on language development. Children who are born without hearing don't have immediate access to the sounds of spoken language, and they don't have access to sign languages unless they're born into a family where American Sign Language or another sign language is the language of the home. So what we're all really focused on is making sure that children who are deaf or hard of hearing get the kind of access that they need to a primary language immediately. We really consider this to be a neurodevelopmental emergency because we know that there is a narrow window of opportunity for the development of proficient language skills. Other principles that are critically important are that we'll be talking a little bit more about the concept of least restrictive environment, LRE. And for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, we think about LRE in a slightly broader way. And so we'll be discussing that today as well. So the second chapter of this book goes into quite a bit of detail about the various federal laws and policies that have an impact on students who are deaf or hard of hearing. I think many of you or most of you are familiar with IDEA and the Massachusetts version, Chapter 766. But students who are deaf and hard of hearing are also covered under the umbrella of Section 504 of the ADA and then the Every Student Succeeds Act. So Chapter 2 is actually quite a useful chapter, especially for parents who are new to this whole special education system, and gives you a sense of all of the protections really that students who are deaf or hard of hearing or students who have any disability have an access to. The third chapter is near and dear to my heart and to the newborn hearing screening program and all of us in particular, because it focuses on early identification and early intervention. And I do want to highlight some of the really critical components of this. As I mentioned, early identification and immediate intervention are the goal. There is a federal guideline, actually, that we refer to as 136. And what we mean by that is that we want all newborns to be screened within the first month of life. That's the one. We want them to be diagnosed, to have a full and complete diagnosis and evaluation of the nature of their hearing status. And then by 6 months, we want them to be enrolled in early intervention, but not just enrolled. We want them enrolled in specialized early intervention services with people who have expertise, in particular in working with children, with infants and toddlers who are deaf and hard of hearing. So one of the key sections in this whole chapter focuses on the importance of getting families to specialized providers as soon as possible, because there's now a tremendous amount of research showing that when infants and toddlers have access to those specialized providers, and those providers can guide families, that we get the best outcomes and really significantly improved outcomes for children who have hearing loss. Also really important and sometimes overlooked is that infants and toddlers with any degree of hearing loss, and that means mild hearing loss to profound hearing loss. It means hearing loss in both ears or hearing loss in one ear. Infants with any degree of hearing loss benefit from early intervention and are able to enroll in early intervention in Massachusetts. So just because the word mild is in there, or mild moderate, doesn't mean that that early intervention is something to be put off. We really want to work with families from the beginning so that they understand the nature of their child's hearing status, the possibility that that status might change, the kinds of hearing assistive devices that are available, the sorts of language opportunities that would be available, from listening and spoken language to ASL, or a combination of all of those. Natural environments are, and providing services in natural environments is a key part of early intervention and a key part of IDEA, of the requirements in IDEA. But it's been recognized for quite some time that other environments might be important as well. And for families who have infants and toddlers with any degree of hearing loss, being able to meet at a center with other families, to be able to go to a center where there are multidisciplinary services, may be an important way, or possibly the best way, for a family to receive their early intervention services. So in Massachusetts, it's very common for families to receive specialized services in center-based programs, as well as in their homes or in the natural environment. Also in this chapter, there is some discussion of the importance of following children beyond early intervention, and recognizing that children who are deaf or hard of hearing remain at risk at the time that they transition at age 3 from what we call Part C of IDEA to Part B. In other words, from early intervention to preschool-based programs. In many cases, it's important to look at the kinds of services and supports that a family and a child received in early intervention that actually got them to where they are. And then we want to look at what additional services, or what services they will need as they enter school-based programs. They really need very close monitoring, because children at 3 years old are still acquiring their primary language. And we need to be sure that they continue to have access to that language, and that they're in an environment that promotes that language and overall development. Also, in this section of the guidelines, there's a big discussion about assessment and the importance of assessment that is not just reporting some standardized test scores, but really looking at the functional skills that a child will have. For any of you that work with 2-year-olds, at 2.5, when we start preparing for transition, 2.5-year-olds are not great test takers, and they may or may not show us what they're able to do and what they're not able to do in a formal test. And so we want to be sure to look at a whole range of functional skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but the gathering language samples, looking at whether children can advocate for themselves, or say when they can't hear something or they don't understand something. Those are all critical components to assess in that transition period. And then there is an important component of this transition process and the IEP process in general, called special factors. And we'll be looking a little bit later at what those special factors are. So the next chapter leads directly into how we evaluate children who are deaf or hard of hearing as they prepare to enter the school system, and what's required for determining eligibility. So thorough and varied assessment performed by people who have special expertise in working with students who have various degrees of hearing status. And we want to be sure that we're uncovering gaps or situations that are going to affect the child's progress once they turn 3. Again, I think we can't emphasize enough the importance of considering any degree of hearing loss as potentially a risk factor. And any degree of hearing loss can have an impact on child's educational performance and their ability to function in educational settings. We also, as part of the evaluation and eligibility process, need to consider the possibility that that a child may have a co-occurring condition. Nationally now, we know that about 40% of infants and toddlers with hearing loss have a co-occurring condition. And that condition could be anything from gross motor delay or other sensory needs. It could include autism. It could include other developmental disabilities. So when we are looking at how to evaluate and how to assess a child, we need to be sure that people who really understand hearing loss are also part of that evaluation process so that we can try to tease apart what might be due to the hearing status and what might be due to another co-occurring condition. Eligibility for special education at age 3 is actually in the federal law considered a 3-pronged process. First of all, the child has to have a disability. So in this case, any degree of hearing loss would meet that first eligibility requirement. But that's not really enough to determine that a child needs special education. The disability also has to have a 2-word a 2-word process that I've left blank here, and I'll get to it in a moment. And then there's a third part. So the disability has to have an adverse effect on the student or the child's ability to learn. So it's not just that you have a disability, but it has to have an adverse effect. And the team has to determine that the child or student needs specially designed instruction. So those are the 3 prongs that are used to determine eligibility for special education. Once eligibility is determined, the IEP team is actually required to consider what are called special factors as they determine eligibility and as they determine possible placement. And this is actually part of IDEA, these special factors for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. The team must consider these 4 basic areas. The team has to look at the language and communication needs of the child, what opportunities that child will have in any setting that's being considered for direct communication with peers and staff in the child's language and communication mode. So if we're talking about a student whose primary language, for example, is ASL, that student must have opportunities for direct communication with peers and professionals in that primary language of ASL. If the student is using spoken language, again, they have to be able to communicate with peers and professionals in a way that gives them full access to the language and communication, to spoken language and communication. We want to look at the academic level of the student, but also the full range of needs and especially whether there are opportunities for direct instruction in the child's language. And so it's very common for teams, as they're considering these special factors, to develop what we're calling a communication plan. What is the language or languages of the child? Who is going to use them in what situations? How will the child have access to the development of English? And so that communication plan is critically important for a team to think about. This is especially true not only for students who are using ASL or spoken English, but for students who come from homes where another language is used, whether it be Spanish or Tagalog. If the goal of the parents is for the child to be bilingual or multilingual, there really does need to be a plan for how that's going to come about. So the services that a student receives have to meet the unique needs of that student. And that's where specially designed instruction comes in. It's the very core of special education for any student with a disability. For students who are deaf or hard of hearing, in particular, we want to constantly reinforce the high expectations that we have for these students. In this section of the guidelines, the writing team and all of the advisors to the writing team wanted to be sure to pay special attention to this concept of least restrictive environment, which is part of IDEA. And to make clear that the least restrictive environment for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing is not necessarily the same as inclusion or full inclusion. So the least restrictive environment for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing has to take into account the communication and related needs of that child. And any setting that doesn't allow for full access to the language, to either spoken language or assigned language, can't be the least restrictive environment for that child. So least restrictive environment might be anywhere along a continuum of possible placements. It might be a residential program. It might be a special day class or special day program. It might be in a regular classroom in a public school with or without supports. So it's very, very important that that we be clear about what least restrictive environment is, and that inclusion may or may not be the best option for a child at a particular time. And again, keeping in mind that that as the child's skills grow and as the child grows and develops, what is the least restrictive environment may change dramatically. So these are just some of the things to consider when we talk about least restrictive environment for a child who is deaf or hard of hearing. Certainly direct language and communication access, and staffing that includes personnel who are trained specifically to work with students who are deaf or hard of hearing. This really is a specialized field. Students who are deaf or hard of hearing have unique needs. And it's very important that whatever environment the child or student is in, that there is access to professionals who have that specialized expertise. There are actually 9 chapters, and so we're coming up to chapter 6. This is an important topic as well as we consider optimizing outcomes for students. What is the school environment like? what kinds of access and accommodations are required. And again, we keep talking about access, but full access to the curriculum is a key component of the IEP teams look at what is the best placement and what is the best setting for a particular student. Gaps in access limit the ability of a child or student to make appropriate progress. And the IEP certainly has quite a space for looking at accommodations that are required. But it's important, and the guidelines really go into some detail about what accommodations might be considered for a particular student. There is no one size fits all. And they're only as good as the implementation of those accommodations. So very often, for example, a student might be using some hearing assistive technology, what we used to call an FM system, a personal FM system. But if that technology isn't working, or if there isn't a way to test and troubleshoot the technology, then it's very possible that the accommodation might be actually parked on a child's ear, but not providing any appropriate access. So it's really important to look at how the environment is going to, the school environment is going to ensure that the accommodations are provided with fidelity. Chapter 7 in the guidelines looked at post-secondary transition. So we've been talking about transition from early intervention to school age, and then we really have to pay particular attention to transition from secondary education to whatever the student is going to be going on to after secondary education. And generally, there will be IEP members who are knowledgeable about post-secondary opportunities, what sorts of skills the student will need in order to appropriately transition. And when we talk about transition planning for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, we want to particularly pay attention to self-advocacy skills. The guidelines actually start discussing self-advocacy skills when we talk about early intervention, birth to 3, and that's really when we start helping a child, initially the parents and then the child, to develop advocacy skills. But as we look at the students' development, and as we look at them transitioning from grade to grade and then eventually to the workplace or to higher education, we want to be sure that they have the skills to advocate for themselves about their communication needs, their language needs, and what accommodations might be required. Chapter 8 in this volume focuses really on personnel. Who are the people? Who are the professionals who actually provide the range of services to deaf or hard of hearing students? And on page 62, there's a little quote here that the school or school district has to ensure that the personnel working with students who are deaf or hard of hearing have some either specialized knowledge or skills, or have access to professional development and in-services that allow them to provide the appropriate services to the students. I actually was going to ask if people want to enter into the Q&A some of the types of professionals who are part of the team for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing. These are actually A through M in alphabetical order, but go ahead and enter into the Q&A other people who would be a part of the team providing for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing. And Renee, do I need to stop sharing my screen for the Q&A, or can people access that?
They're able to access it.
Okay. And then if as those answers are coming in, would you share some of them with us?
Hi, Barbara, it's Lauren. I see several, including speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, cued speech transliterator. Several people mentioned that there are that teacher of the deaf is not listed.
We just went A through M.
Someone says, of course, the parent, psychologist, and I missed one here, audiologist.
Okay, I'll go a little beyond A through M here. So thank you. So yes, OTs and PTs, obviously part of the team is somebody representing the student's school district, whether they're in a private placement or in their public school, school psychologists, social workers, special education teachers who are not necessarily specialists in hearing loss, SLPs. And I did want to particularly highlight the fact that in Massachusetts, there are actually two types of licensure for teachers of students who are deaf or hard of hearing. One license focuses on teachers, TODs, who have special expertise in American Sign Language and total communication. And there's a second license for teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing who specialize in what is called in this licensure oral, what we might now call listening and spoken language. But it's important to recognize that these are two overlapping, but also very areas where there is a distinct knowledge set. And our state had made the determination that it's really important that a teacher with the appropriate background is working with a student. So a student who is primarily using ASL as the language of instruction needs to have a teacher who is fluent in ASL and has actually passed a competency exam in ASL. And a student who is using primarily listening and spoken language as the language of instruction needs to have a teacher of the deaf who knows how to ensure good auditory access and how to promote spoken language development. So keep in mind that TODs come in at least two flavors and probably a lot more. One of the really nice things in this guideline, the Purple Book, is something that has appeared for the first time in this third edition. And that is a sort of a way to do a self-assessment, whether you're a school district, or a particular program, to actually reflect on the practices that are in place in your area, that are in place in your school district, and where it's basically a way to do a self-study, where you might have gaps and where there might be opportunities for improvement. And I'll just sort of hold this up so you can see it a little bit. But this section of the guidelines basically has you identify a review team that would include supervisors, administrators, parents, and other professionals in that school or program. and to look at the guidelines and then go through each of the main topic areas to see whether you think your program is meeting the practice, or whether there might be some gaps in the practice. And I can show you just one. Let's see, right. So the idea is that there's a team, that you read the book, determine whether those 10 essential practices that I talked about in the beginning are in place, and develop next steps. And then this really, this guide is a very handy way of developing an improvement plan, where the team could determine what objectives or activities or timelines might be appropriate. So, for example, the section for chapter 6 actually has a whole section for evaluating the least restrictive environment and determining whether a full continuum of options are available, including special schools on a full or part-time basis, including itinerant teachers of the deaf or educational audiologists. And so the question, for example, in this little section that would be asked is everyone aware, are the team members aware of the unique needs of students who are deaf or hard of hearing? And are they aware of the range of possible placements? And so I want to, that's been the sort of galloping through the guidelines overview for you, giving you a sense of this resource that that's available to anyone to download, but that we really in Massachusetts have committed to following. But I wanted to take some time now to introduce you to Samran, who is a mother of 2 children who are deaf. And in a moment, I'm going to ask her some questions and have her share her expertise. I do want to say that Samran's children are both have cochlear implants, and both are using listening and spoken language. We had planned to have a parent whose child uses American Sign Language and some spoken language to join us as well. And unfortunately, last night we heard that there was a death in the family and she was not able to join us. So we will make other opportunities to give expert parents some opportunities to share with us. So Samran, I wonder if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your 2 boys.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. I want to say thank you for having me over. And yes, my name is Samreen Salahuddin, and I have 3 kids. The youngest one is born with normal hearing, but my first 2 kids, they were born profoundly deaf, and they use cochlear implants for their hearing. My oldest one, he is 13 years old, who is currently in 7th grade, and my second child, he is in 2nd grade, who is 8 years old. So yeah, they were born profoundly deaf, and now they are using cochlear implants for their hearing.
So Samran, one of the things that you and I had talked about earlier was the fact that your 2 children had very different experiences, that your older son did not have early access to early intervention, and really didn't receive specialized services for quite some time. And your younger child did have access to early intervention. So could you tell us a little bit about what what your experience was?
Yes. So my oldest one, he got the cochlear implant, first cochlear implant. We did sequential with him. I mean, we didn't get both at the same time. The first cochlear implant he got at the age of 16 and 16 months. And when he turned 2, we got the other implant done for him. So, and my youngest one, he got the implant at the age of 11 months. So we saw a huge difference. The time of the treatment that the kids get, it makes a huge difference. So my oldest one, he didn't get a early intervention for quite a while, and that definitely delayed his progress. And but my youngest one, he got the early intervention at the right time, and he got all the services that was required according to his need, and his development was really, really very good. I mean, compared to the other one. Yeah. So definitely the early intervention makes a huge difference. And the earlier it gets, the better it is for the better outcome, for the better language development, the speech and everything. Yeah.
And thank you. I think sometimes, when early intervention is not available, we often sort of forget how vital those early services are. And
Absolutely, absolutely. It is so important, the early services. And I would like to put emphasis on two things: the early treatment and the early intervention, both. I mean, the sooner whatever the degree of the deafness is, if the child requires hearing aid, it should be, I mean, the child should get as soon as possible. If the child needs a cochlear implants, he should get as soon as possible, and the early intervention definitely makes so much difference. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say for a family that is choosing to use American Sign Language as the primary language, again, early access to fluent native users of ASL, early access to a visual language is also really important. Samran, you have been working with both of your boys. You've had lots of opportunities to work with professionals, and I wonder if you could maybe give some tips to parents about what have you learned about how to collaborate effectively with your school district and with the professionals that you work with.
So yes, I mean, it's all about making a team, and uh, the team that you make includes doctor, primary care, the ENT doctor, and the audiologist, the speech therapist. I mean, all these people, they make a team. So you have to actually reach out to the people, get as many supports as you can. And there is a very good support that the Mass Commission of Deaf provide. I mean, children's specialists, they are really, really very helpful. And they come to your home to guide you. They can come to the IP meeting. They are there to help you and to guide you. So yes, making a team is very important. And team gets transitioned as the kid get transitioned from one phase to another, like from early intervention to the preschool, and then preschool to the elementary school. So yeah, as kids get transitioned, the team gets transitioned as well.
And then if you were thinking about, we have a lot of administrators from school programs joining us today also. So as a parent, what tips would you give to school administrators about how to effectively collaborate with parents?
So to the school administration, I would say that understand the need of the child and work to make it work. Don't make it tough for the parents, because parents are already going through a lot of things, and they need the support, and the child needs the support. So if you work really what is important that they provide an environment for the child where they can really work, develop their language in an optimum way. And educator working with the kids should be provided with professional training, opportunities, and resources to facilitate their knowledge about the hearing loss and an ongoing basis. They should provide the environment, acoustic treatment of the classroom and all that stuff. So yes, I mean, and this is what it is, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you've put together, you've been an essential part of different teams, one for each of your boys, and in one case, one of your children has had some needs in addition to hearing loss. How has that worked?
So as I said that my oldest one, he had the delay in his language because there were a lot of communication gap. He didn't receive the early intervention at the right time. So because of that, he had some social issues. He had some anxiety, social issues. So yes, it was a tough time for him, but he is doing so much better now because of the services that he got. The town, my town really worked really well, and they provided all the required services to him. So he has access to he's really doing very well right now, academically and socially. Yeah.
Well, you're to be really congratulated as the convener in many ways of teams that will follow your boys throughout their education, and eventually you step back and they become the leaders of their teams. I wonder if it looks like we have a few minutes anyway for questions, and feel free to ask questions of any of us. I'm sure Samron would be happy to answer questions, and I will too. I want to thank you again for joining us, for learning about this publication, these educational service guidelines that are here to help us chart the future for deaf education in our state. So if there are questions from our audience, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And I think Lauren will be, or Tricia will be reading them.
Yes, hi, it's Lauren. We have a question about the event, when it will be able to be viewed.
So
And
this is Sarah. We will be sending out the recording hopefully tonight, but we will send out the link as soon as it is available. Thank you for the question.
So there were a few, thank you for taking the time and how interesting this presentation was. So there's a question also, actually one just popped up. Who receives the purple book?
Okay, that's a great question. For the first two editions, including the Blue Book, there was actually federal funding to disseminate it and provide trainings. This time around, that funding didn't exist. And so it's really in forums like this that, that we're all reaching out to let anyone who's interested know that the Purple Book is available, and it's available to download free of charge to anyone, a parent or a professional or a school district administrator who is trying to meet the needs of a particular student or group of students. So it is available, and we will, Lauren, how will we disseminate the link so that people can download the book?
So we can disseminate the link in the email that goes out with, that Sarah sends.
Mm-hmm.
And it should also be on Dusty's website. So there's a couple of ways we can do that.
Great. But I do want to just say how important it is that all of the different constituencies in our state who are concerned with students who are deaf or hard of hearing have really committed to going through the book and evaluating how we're doing as a state and where the gaps are in the state as well. So we are really, it's very exciting to be in a state where this where we're really looking at these best practices quite seriously.
Thanks, Barbara. And I know that the ASL interpreters have to run because they have other assignments. So I think that we should wrap up because we're just at time. So thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, same here.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
And again, thanks to everybody who helped to sponsor this, to the Federation, to the Newborn Hearing Screening Program, to the Mass Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, to the Department of Education. It's a joy to work with all of you. Thank you. And
Same here,
especially to
Barbara.
Samron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samron.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.